Joy, how are you doing today? Welcome to Custodians of Crafts.
Hey, Renee, long time and long overdue. I'm doing good and I'm glad we finally got down to doing this after a while.
Yeah, so to everybody who's listening, Joy is like a really, really old friend. Yes, she's called Priyanjali.
I barely get to hear that name, myself. I think it's just what started off as just a social media kind of a name just for that has now kind of taken over every space.
So we have our work chalked out for today. It's a long conversation, and I think this is one of the first conversations that we are having on Custodians of Craft on India on a macroscopic level, fashion and retail ripples in India, but also like the consumption and supply chain. And you are a supply chain expert. You know the ins and outs, and you've been in this industry for such a long time, and specifically in the global south. So let's dive in. But I'm going to start first with you because there's so much to learn from your career itself. You've founded your own brand, then you worked with startups in e-commerce and then went on to leadership roles at some of the biggest supply chain and logistics organizations in India. You've been focused on retail, fashion and innovation primarily. And so all this experience, if you had to describe today who Joy is, not just the titles, and what would you frame your personal and professional identity as?
And so the irony of it all is, I think, from the beginning, when I decided to kind of pursue fashion as something I would want to explore and build a career on, it was something I was nudged into by my mother, who kind of recognized that I had an eye, or let's say I had the aesthetic, and I had what it needed to be, and was creative. So she kind of recognized that that's the space I need to probably would do really well with. And of course, I don't think I kind of proved her wrong. So I got into NIFT and pursued 3 years in fashion. I topped the country that year when I graduated. And then from there on, I think everything was a mix of accident as well as plan. So it's, some parts of my career were accidental and some were planned. But I would say if I look back in hindsight, no regrets, because over the last 23 years that I've been working now, I've kind of, been able to see all parts of this industry, right from product design to how it is actually the fabrics are sourced, where is it sourced from, how do you make the product, what are the nuances that kind of go into designing the product, and then how do you sell it, how do you market it, how do you merchandise it, and then finally the last few years with things that happen in our country as well, with the market kind of becoming a lot larger, e-commerce kind of getting launched, I got into that space of e-commerce, and then supply chain happened. The last 9 to 10 years or so has been supply chain. So like I said, it's been a mix of planned and as well as accidental, but overall it's been a very fulfilling journey because I've gotten a very good sense of like my view on fashion is not now just, oh, that's a great product. My view on fashion is now a lot more of, oh, it's a product, great, but how has it gotten here? And, how is it kind of, making money for a brand? Or let's say, how is that brand standing? Because now one realizes that it's, beyond it's beyond the product. There's a lot more that goes into making the brand a brand, and it is just not only about the product, it's also about what goes into the back end. So I think that's been the holistic view of things that I've gotten to now.
Yeah, I mean, 23 years is a long time. So I feel like in the last 23 years, so much has changed in India. I think I would love your perspective on that because we see the consumer expectations change, and I think for a lot of Indians, like upward mobility is westernization, modernization is westernization. So we see that, of course, in fashion as well. Is it possible to get a perspective on that from you? Can you weave your personal observations, how fashion as a business ecosystem has matured? What has stayed constant? Because India has its own identity. What has stayed constant and what has shifted? Can you just share a little bit more about that?
I mean, to give you a sense, when I started, or let's say, this is around 2005 and 6, India was very different and at a very different stage at that point. There was, it was fashion, or let's say the industry was all about either designer, when there were few retail brands, which was like the likes of Shoppers Stop, etc., who were trying to, so you either had like really high niche product or you had premium, or let's say the mid segment kind of product, and brands kind of catering to that. But from there on, right? So there's been so much has happened. So let's say every for India, which has kind of moved at such a large and fast pace. From there's been those few years where you had that coexistence, and then you had the emergence of e-commerce, which changed the entire space. And in 2010, you had marketplaces kind of launching, and that changed the way consumers shopped. I mean, for all of us who could even think of buying products online, slowly moved to buying products online and designer wear online.
Yeah, I remember that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a time where it was very interesting to see how consumers initially obviously refrained to buying products online, and eventually it just became the go-to for a lot of consumers, right? And that was, as we speak, right, that was like the evolution. I would say I was in the midst of an evolution that was happening at that point in time, where people were changing the way they shopped, right? People were changing from going offline to online. People were changing their tastes. There was a lot more accessibility to even like the smaller parts of the countries now,
Yeah.
um, to be able to go online and shop. So if there were brands that were in the tier one cities, were now even available in tier two, tier three cities. So there was a lot more accessibility that kind of started, and that was a time when people where brands were delivering in 3 weeks or so. And then now, if I compare from there to here, brands develop the kind of, if you order something, it actually is next day pretty much, right? So that's the kind of evolution one is seeing. The other big change that came was also the m-commerce, right, which is like the launch of apps. So a lot of brands realize that now, with e-commerce becoming a very large chunk of their sales and revenue and business. So to give you a sense, back in the day when e-commerce launched, it was barely 2-3% of, or maybe even less than that, revenue for brands. But now it's about 25-30% at least for a lot of brands, right? So
Okay.
that's a very large chunk of business that comes from online. And that's how the evolution of m-commerce happened and apps happened. Basically, to get to a point where it becomes very easy and accessible for the customer to just go on the app or go online and shop. Right, and also return, etc., to all of that. I think the other big chapter was after COVID, right? Because in COVID, everybody was locked in, accessibility obviously reduced. You couldn't go out, you couldn't shop, and that's when things had to be delivered home. So e-commerce added another layer, which is the quick commerce, right, where people say, I need stuff, within the next 2-3 hours, and that's when that was like the use case for quick commerce to kind of get launched, and it was like the grounds for it. And that started with the likes of a lot of brands or a lot of startups that started in India to be able to launch, or let's say deliver things to you in 2-3 hours, or which became even faster now. And now you have things getting delivered in 15 minutes. And all of this kind of started with like, FMCG, beauty, personal care. But over the last few months, and I work now with a lot of focus with fashion brands and in the country, trying to understand how what they are doing and how are they evolving their supply chains. And incidentally, it just so happens that now a lot of brands, very well known brands in India, have also now started to list and also upload their inventory on quick commerce. So that again becomes another channel for them, right? So now if I'm ordering
Yeah.
something on a quick commerce app, like if I am, now we're going to be entering Diwali, and if I don't have a kurta, or I don't have not have the time, I can actually go to their app, and order from their a nice Fab India kurta, which will deliver to me in 15 minutes, and I'm ready to go out in the evening. So it's been extremely interesting to see all of this evolution happen the last 15 years, with this entire space changing. I also feel in the last 15 years, a lot of global brands also entered the market, entered the country. You had the likes of Zara, H&M come in. You had the likes of Mango come in. And that obviously brought in a lot of competition for brands in the country, right? India, which was predominantly Indian wear, where most women, when they started to, or when they go to work, or let's say the running chores, etc., wore tunics and Indian kurtas and, SKDs, which is like the salwar kurta, have all transitioned now to Western wear. So the actual market share of Indian has gone down from a good 65-70%. back in the day, about 8 to 10 years ago, to now just about 25-30%. So that
Right.
market shift has happened. Women are wearing a lot more westerns because they're either going to work. Obviously, the number of women going to work has increased. So either they're going to work, or they're running chores, or they're going out. It's become a lot more on the western side. So you'll see, like every 10 years, there's always a death, and there's always like a newborn kind of a thing, right? In terms of, so a lot of the Indian brands, so to say, have kind of are dying a slow death, and you have like a evolution of a new type of homegrown brand, so to say, which are a lot more Western focused, or let's say Indo-Western focused, and that entire focus and attention of Indian wear is kind of reducing quite a bit. It's a functionality, comfort, all of that has become a very important aspect for people when they're shopping now. So yeah, all of this has happened, and it's very interesting, because with all of this evolution, one cannot detach from the fact that it'll have implications on tech. You need tech, you need data, you need very, very robust supply chains to be able to deliver to you in 3 hours or 1 hour or 15 minutes or so. So now I think we're at a point where, like I was saying in the beginning of the conversation, that you cannot be successful as a brand. It could be any brand in any space or vertical, if you've not had the back end thought through and integrated at the same time, right? Because now they both kind of go hand in hand, which was not the case earlier.
I remember when the international brands came to India. I remember, of course, the e-commerce getting more popular. I think we were both working at an organization together at that point as well. But the fact that Indian wear has now declined in terms of, I'm guessing, the share of revenue versus Indo-Western is quite interesting.
You have, like, the emergence of homegrown brands. I obviously keep a very close watch on this in this space, because there's an interest here from the background and what I've studied, but the number of brands that have been launched in the last homegrown brands that have been launched in the last 5 years, very, very large chunk of it is actually Western now, with a little bit of Indian element, of course. It could be fabric, it could be colors, etc.
Yeah, more traditional. Super clear. So let's talk a little bit about the supply chain aspect, because I think that's where I want to understand more nuanced perspective versus what we read online from you. My understanding of supply chain is, of course, comes from working in the industry. But for someone who doesn't work in the industry, let's just look at your perspective on how does shipping and supply chain play a role in fashion specifically. What is the unseen elements of it, and what is potentially the changes that we would see in the next few years, you think?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think for me also, this was, when I got into this space, it was very new and very surprising, because I did not realize till the time I actually got into this space as to how complicated this space actually is. When we look at, as consumers, when you go to a Zara, you actually just going and picking up a shirt. But when you go and when you get into the nuances of how it's been manufactured, like, it's the yarns are sourced from somewhere else, and then they're shipped to somewhere else, and the fabric is made somewhere else, and then it's kind of shipped to another country where it's manufactured, and then the accessories and the trims and buttons come from another country, then it's assembled in the manufacturing, and then it goes back to the warehouse. So it's extremely complicated, right? So and that's how it's been designed up until now, right? So if we look at somebody like Inditex, right, which is Zara, they would source their fabric, or let's say they would source either from India, their fabric, or let's say they would source from Ethiopia, their fabric, that would then kind of be shipped across to their manufacturing hubs, which could be Indonesia, Vietnam, China, Turkey. And then the buttons or the trims or accessories or embroideries are then, so if it's embroidery, it is, then made in India and shipped to the manufacturing to, let's say, Vietnam, and then the buttons are sourced from China and it's shipped to Vietnam. Then it's kind of all assembled together as a product. And then it is shipped back to the warehouse in Spain, in Zaragoza, which is where Zara's main key warehouse is. And then it's shipped to the final consuming country, where they need to want to ship it as for the consumer, right? And consumer. So all of this is all supply chain, right? So we live in a very, so to say, globalized kind of world where everything is very very, very closely linked. It's not that you can't work independent of each other in terms of, the different fragments of supply chain. So these are things that I kind of learned and realized myself when I, kind of got into the space of supply chain. I think the challenges that one sees is, of course, right? I mean, recently there's been a lot of trade imbalance, there's been a lot of tariffs, and all of this obviously has a very real impact on prices, has a real impact on sourcing. Of course, the recent impact has been in India with the tariffs being coming in. So all of this kind of leads to brands having to go back to the drawing board and rethink their sourcing strategy, which of course is a very long term. I mean, they've kind of come to this space, or let's say they've come to a strategy over a period of time, right? So now to change that suddenly takes time. So it's been a lot of struggle for brands right now as we speak, because most of them are trying to now move into a more near shoring, kind of go closer to where they are right now, and not try to, or let's say, cut down the dependency on long term shoring, or let's say long distance, and try to kind of cut down those shipping times, and move closer to the source of where the fabrics are, so that they have a better control of their supply chain, as opposed to kind of spending days trying to get the fabrics and then ship it to the other part of the world and then ship it across the world for consumers, right? So I think that has been quite a bit of a challenge right now, that the tariffs, the trade wars, in fact, for that matter, we have very few, let's say, ports and channels through where exports and imports happen across the world, right? And if there is any kind of war on those, that has an immediate impact on brands. So, for example, in 2024, the Red Sea crisis was a very real crisis, and a very large chunk of movements happened to the Red Sea. So when that happened, most of the brands had to kind of do a turnaround or work around that and change their shipping strategy, or let's just change the shipping route, which meant, there was an implication on costs, there was an implication on the time it took to reach the consumer. And in fashion in today's day and age, if time is of most essence, so if you are not being able to get to your consumer on time, then you basically lose out on your sale, right? Which means you're sitting on inventory, sitting on your bottom line. You obviously don't make the sale because it's not on the rack. You obviously also, there's an additional cost of rerouting things. You're paying maybe 2x on shipping because you have to now reroute everything around, and then there's no guarantee of sale, right? Because it's not reached on
Yeah.
time. So all of these things are very, very real challenges that brands are facing as we speak. So as a consequence, I think brands have started to strategize to say, how can I move sourcing closer to my production, and that closer to my consumer, so that I try and uh, you know uh, minimize my risk in terms of getting the product online, or let's say to the consumer on time.
Okay, super clear. So just want to understand, how do you think Global South ties into it, again from a perspective of, you already touched upon that a little bit, but you are now part of one of the largest logistics and supply chain networks and companies. So can you help us understand on a basic levels, what is the behind the scenes of this impact in the Global South and the consumer countries, let's say, like the biggest brands coming from Europe or America?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it was interesting for me also to understand this, but 75 to 80% of whatever is manufactured in the global south is for the north, right? So basically, it's being manufactured in Indonesia, China, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, is all for consumption in the north. I feel that even within the global south, there's a lot of changes happening, because a lot of brands are now, I mean, China, Indonesia, Vietnam have a very good infrastructure that's already been put in place for manufacturing, right? They have the right labor policies, they have the right infrastructure, they have the ports, they can manage the traffic in terms of the port, so there's lesser port congestions, all of that, and they're only getting better with it. So a lot of the manufacturing in the recent past that I have been talking to brands have actually been moving away to, let's say, the South Asia kind of a block, right? India is a very small percentage in terms of manufacturing, right? Barely 3% of the manufacturing happens here. As a textile hub as well, we do supply a lot of the textile. We're the largest, or let's say second largest, in cotton and in silk in terms of fabrics, but we essentially supply that to manufacturers, which could be in Bangladesh, who could be in Vietnam, who could be Indonesia, China, right, in this part of the world. And a lot of brands are now moving to that block, which is Southeast Asia, because it's just better costs and better efficiencies, right, as opposed to India, so to say. I think India still has some time to get to where they want to in terms of becoming an integrated, verticalized supply chain where, the right from the fabric, the raw material, the sourcing to the manufacturing to the trims, everything is kind of done in-house, or done within the country. Having said that, the government has recognized that and is doing a lot, right? There's been a lot of push in the last 5 years or so to kind of build multimodal logistic parks, to build like integrated kind of supply chain where they kind of, or let's say textile hubs. A lot of PLI schemes have been given to build those kind of textile hubs where the manufacturing, sourcing, everything happens from there. There's a lot of push being put into infrastructure and port development. I mean, as of now, we in a country which is so huge, like such a huge coastline, we just have two main ports, right? We have the Calcutta and we have the Nhava Sheva, which is in Bombay. So if we want to become the manufacturing hub, or let's say we want to get closer to an Indonesia and China, we need to have a much more robust port, coast around along the coastline as well to be able to manage that import export. And that's the push that the government is now trying to do through all of these schemes and all of this, incentives that they're putting in, where they can try and reduce the port congestions, open up more ports, be able to get in more merchandise, be able to export a lot more, enable the manufacturing over here through PLI schemes, right? Get the logistic cost to be reduced. So the logistics cost also, to give you an example, over the last 10 to 15 years has come down, right? So from about 12, 13% to about an 8, 9% now. And the target is to come down to even further to about 5, 6% of the product, right? Because that in itself adds a lot to the final MRP, right? Because every price that you buy it at includes everything, right? Right from fabric, sourcing, systems as well as logistics. The idea is to bring down all of these costs so it becomes a lot more competitive for brands to source as well as manufacture here, as opposed to just being the sourcing country providing the fabrics or so. So a lot of all of that, those efforts are being made, but I feel as there's still some way to go. I think for the next 5 years, the focus will be to kind of build up on all of that. But in the meantime, countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, China are still going to be the manufacturing hubs for a lot of the brands within the country, as well as a lot of the global brands who are kind of trying to manufacture outside as well, right? And then kind of deliver it here. So that's where we kind of are right now. And like I said, I mean, this imbalance, if all these efforts go in the right place, we should see India's percentage, or let's say we hope to see India's percentage change from what it is right now to at least 68%. As opposed to the other countries which are like I said, we are around the smallest, which is Bangladesh, Vietnam, are all about 68% already. China, some 25, 30% from a manufacturing point of view. So very, very long way to go still.
I think, especially countries like Bangladesh, there has been a policy directive to focus on infrastructure to build it as a destination for manufacturing, specifically fashion and allied industries. So, if so, I didn't know that about ports either. That we just have two big ports which enable transfer of goods internationally.
Think about it, right? If there's a congestion at a port and we importing or exporting, but if it just
Yeah.
gets stuck there, it's not going to be able to move to the end destination, which basically means, I mean, like I said, so fashion, and this is what I realized when I moved into supply chain, that fashion is not only about, fashion per se, but it is about inventory, right? Your business or your brand is as successful as your inventory or your styles being on the rack or whatever it needs to be sold. Because if it's not there, they're never going to be able to sell it, right? And that is all nothing but the back end, right? How robust or how strong your back end is. Which then again brings me back to the point that for brands, looking at what's been happening the last 5 years or so with COVID, and then with the wars, which are constant now pretty much, then with the tariffs, and then the ever changing trade policies, right, between the countries, now brands are kind of moving to say, let's just kind of go closer and
Yeah.
de-risk our supply chain so that we don't have to deal with extra costs, delays, and no inventory. right? Which just goes and immediately goes and hits your bottom.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this has impact. Supply chain obviously has operational direct impact. It has financial impact, like you pointed out. The cost is gets added up, and it's a significant percentage. I also know that it has impact on the sustainability, and I think in Europe specifically, the last mile carbon impact is something that brands have started caring more about. There has been regulations on that as well. I just was wondering if you have anything to add when we talk about the challenges of supply chain and its impact or disruptions through climate and sustainability.
Well, I think it's been the talk, or it's been the focus for some time now. There is no doubt about the fact that that is to move things around. It's obviously going to add to your footprint, right? Because you're using ocean or using shipping or you're using air to move things around, either from a sourcing point of view or the final last mile point of view, transportation logistics as of now is very far from being sustainable. People like us or let supply chain organizations are trying to gradually move in a direction where they use green fuels, where they use methanol. We're still very far, we're very, very far from it. There are goals and targets to kind of get to by 2030 for us to kind of get to a zero carbon footprint or so. But again, it's a long road ahead. Shipping in itself is for most of these global brands, if I add the sourcing and the manufacturing and the movement around, is about 10% of the carbon footprint of the product, right? Is shipping. And if it is when we talk about if it's moving through air, that's even higher. Right, because shipping is obviously much slower, and there's a lesser fuel. I mean, a lot more efficient in terms of fuel consumption, but air is a lot more dangerous. Fast fashion has a lot of questions to answer, right? Because brands in fast fashion essentially use air, and that's a very large part of the carbon footprint comes from air, right? So I think responsibility will lie at both ends, right? It is going to be the responsibility of brands, of course, and if they do nearshore, then that in itself kind of takes care of a lot in terms of the because then you're not covering large distances. Then you're kind of you're cutting down that distance, which then cuts down your carbon footprint. The other is that companies who are enabling or supply chain companies who are enabling movement have to make very conscious efforts to move towards greener fuel, right? And lower emissions. Most of the global companies I know are moving that in that direction, including us. We pretty much focused by 2030, like I said, to kind of move to a zero footprint on the ocean part by using alternative fuels, methane. We, in fact, already launched quite a few vessels using methane. But I think this is something that is a work in progress. I don't think it's going to happen over the next or so soon, right? It'll probably happen, let's say 20, 30 years from now. We probably should see a 50% change in that direction to make it a lot more sustainable. I also feel like when we talk about sustainability, a lot of the change with EU also putting in the regulations that they have, I feel it will compel a lot of brands and consumers to think slow fashion as opposed to fast fashion, which in itself means, sustainable sourcing, which in itself means lesser consumption, which itself means reusable, recyclable. And in that itself, I feel a lot of these challenges should kind of get addressed. But again, from where honestly we stand as of now, or I stand, or the way I look at things, I don't think it's really the prime point of focus for a lot of brands, at least in India, right? It's still not. I mean, uh, Inditex uses 95% of their movement is done through air, and they're moving millions of pieces on a daily basis around the globe using air. All the last mile in the country in India is done through air. When I say last mile, I mean from the to the consumer. And if I'm shopping online,
Yeah.
all deliveries are done through air, and that's all carbon footprint. Everything that is happening in India from a quick commerce point of view is happening. Let's say I want something 15 minutes and I forget to order something in my cart, I place another order. So every time the rider is coming to me, there is a footprint to that,
Yeah.
right? So all of those things I don't think have even been thought through as of now. As of people are pretty much right now trying to build on businesses. I don't think sustainability is something that's kind of really been seriously looked into as a part of the business model. It's one thing that is being addressed on the side, but it's not a part of the business model yet.
Yeah, super clear. It's interesting. I was thinking about the quick commerce as well, like the mobile commerce, and I feel like that is potentially in the future when we start measuring this data is probably going to be a big contributor. But that being said, even in countries where we don't have quick commerce, there are challenges because big brands can are, like you said, shipping through air. And I think the reality is that the prices have been so low, these brands, that it invariably, in terms of making a choice from the consumer side, has been that you want to pick something which is cheaper and which looks pretty good, on at least on the pictures and on website and on the store. And the reality is that now I see, at least anecdotally, a lot of fast fashion brands are slowly increasing their prices. I don't know what the end to that is, but I've seen slowly, like, and this is one piece that I want to do on one of the newsletters for subject matter, is like, where does that go? Because they're slowly increasing the prices, and I think that perhaps will make it easier for consumers to make a more conscious decision because of the prices increase. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
spitballing, but it's a very interesting time, I think.
I can tell you, like, when Zara launched in India, Zara and H&M launched in India online around 2017 or 18, something like that,
Yeah,
right?
you're right. Yeah,
And see, India is, if I just to talk about India, it's an extremely, extremely, I call it a very pampered consumer, right? I think the business models also for a lot of brands have been built to buy, or let's say get in as many consumers, right? So that the business model is built around that, which could be at the cost of a lot of things, right? It doesn't really matter. So, like I said, sustainability is least of the priorities right now, right? So if it means that the business model is okay, I want to acquire more consumers and their data, how do I do that, right? How do I kind of keep that retention on, which means how can I get it to them faster, or can I make this cheaper for them, or things like this. Now, to give you a very simple example, in India, you could from a website you could buy. The return policy is so easy that I could buy from a marketplace 10 things, and people do that. It's not, I mean, I have seen this enough and more because I work in this space, so I have access to data. But people will pretty much in one cart buy 8 or 10 things, try them on, and then return five. Or let's say buy a few things, wear them, and come back and then pack it and ship it back, right? Now, as a brand in the country, you cannot question that, or you don't question it, because your main aim right now is to acquire the consumer and the customer, right? We have, or I have gone through experiences where we've had to, under the brand's directive, we've had to block certain pin codes or consumers because they were just buying 30, 40 things and then returning a large chunk of them. There is in the US, return means you as a consumer need to go to a certain point, go drop it off. Here, return in India means I pick it up, and if I don't like it, I punch a return. Somebody comes for free, picks it up, and then takes it out, get my refund in like one day, and everything is hunky dory. Who loses in the entire process is the brand, of course, because they are paying the entire logistic cost. And of course, the environment, right? Because you have somebody delivering, and then you have somebody coming and picking it up and then going back. And then that goes back to the brand. So there's a lot of carbon footprint here unaccounted for that nobody's talking about, right? And these are things that happen. And like I said, quick commerce, I mean, I never wanted things. I mean, who thought that you would want things in 15 minutes? But now it's become, they've actually created that need for you to, get things in 15 minutes. So now everybody's shopping 15 minutes. And again, you forget one thing, you order again, and you forget another thing, you order again. So you have riders going up and down on, everywhere. So it's a pros and cons for everything. But again, like I said, sustainability in this larger scheme of things is nowhere in the picture clearly as of now, and it's definitely not a part of the business model yet. But like you said, some brands have realized this and have started to move. A lot more evolved brands have started to move now towards more sustainable practices. Zara and H&M have started to charge
yeah,
consumers
as well.
for returns, right? So there is a return, you have to pay an X amount, which is definitely, and we do the back end for some of these brands. We've seen a change, right? So the change is a very healthy change, which is now you have your consumer number of people buying from you might have shrunk a little bit, but they're a lot more serious consumers, because now people who really want it are buying what they want, right? And not just like buying 10 things and returning, because now they have to pay for return. So you have a lot more serious consumers and you have a less return, which is great, because as a fashion brand, I mean, in India, is about 25 has about 25% returns, which is not the best of news. You don't want to be sitting with
Yeah.
25% of inventories. If you think about it, if you're in a month, if I'm selling, let's say, for example, 100,000 pieces, from that 25% comes back to me, which is just inventory that I've not been able to sell. And then I have to find ways to kind of either liquidate it or kind of refurbish it and put it back in inventory is basically a loss. And this is the stuff that then goes into landfills. So small things of like putting in a charge for returns, making it, putting some strict policies in prepaid versus cash on delivery. All of these things have a large impact in terms of the final inventory that you're sitting on and kind of does not go into landfills, etc. Yeah, so some brands are doing it, but very, very long way to go right now as from where we
Yeah.
stand.
Yeah, a lot of food for thought. I have so many follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna move towards more life and personal growth questions. I've watched Priyanjali do so many different things over the last couple of years that we've known each other, and also I look up to her in so many specifically growth aspects of life. I want to first want to talk more about your other passion, which is running. You're an avid runner and athlete. You've pursued that passionately for such a long time. You've won accolades in that career as well. You are so disciplined, and I've seen you do that. We've gone out for a dinner or for a party, you wake up again in the morning and go back to your training. So that kind of discipline and training as a marathoner, how has that shaped your work, your leadership, and personal growth? And
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's been a very integral part of who I am, or who I am, and I think everybody who's close to me knows that. I've never really hidden it. I think everything that happens for any individual, I feel, comes from an experience or comes from my learnings. I went through my own personal journey, and that personal journey got me to running became a part of my recovery from depression, and that's why it became such a pivotal part of my life. And that discipline and that persistence or the ability to go and challenge myself every day, and wake up and do something time and again, time and again, time and again, till I actually see results, has shaped who I am now. So everything I do, I think I look at it from that lens. I don't think I'm the most comfortable with comfort. For me, it's always been now about discomfort because I'm so accustomed to thinking and being in that space, right? So, like you said, that could be evenings where one would be out, but it's just that when you make the decision or that choice to say, okay, I'm going to call it an early night, or I've had, a little bit of a late night, but I have to wake up early in the morning. Those choices that put you, that make you disciplined in the long term. And it's that discipline that makes you face those challenges. And that's those challenges that make you eventually a lot more tenacious to be able to manage anything and everything that comes your way. Right. So I think it's just been a journey, and I'm kind of somewhere also thankful I went through that phase of depression in my life, because if I wouldn't have become the person I am today, or I'm trying to still continue to evolve to become somebody, or let's say challenge myself on literally a daily basis, right? So, and that's what I kind of take through my work as well, where work is not easy, and life, I think, is not easy. But again, I've kind of come to a point where I feel that I have that kind of strength to be able to, or the confidence to be able to manage situations, to be able to manage clients, to be able to manage difficult situations at work, to be able to also persist through, and also be able to pass that energy on to my team. Right. I don't think any of us have kind of, or me and my teams have any given point in time worked with the narrative of, okay, let it go. It's fine. We've always tried our best to do what we want to do or do what we have to do. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but at least you tried. And that's the kind of narrative I've always kind of worked with also. And I think that comes from the discipline that I've had from running.
so today we're seeing a huge conversation around hiring, especially with the coming of AI, questions around hiring, etc. In general, everybody's feeling a little bit lost. Everybody's feeling a little bit challenged. I mean, I can say that for myself as a mid-career professional. I feel I have to re-strategize the way I approach my career. And so there's always interesting to get perspective from someone like yourself who's done it for 23 years. Like, if you had any advice that you would give to Joe, say, who is, beginning her career journey today, what would that be?
Well, one thing I would also admit is that we all are trying to figure things out. I think professionally,
Always.
personally, right? It's always a constant. I think that's what is also common between a lot of people like us, right? Like you and me, who are constantly challenging and constantly trying to navigate through what's going on. I definitely agree that a lot has actually in the last few years has been a lot more rapid. And I feel to become or to constantly stay relevant in today's day and age, I feel, the two things that come to the top of my mind. One is, and I think that's something that even I try and do very consciously, is pause, right? To kind of pause and reflect. What happens is that there's just so much happening and, things are obviously moving much faster now, the speed at which, life is moving, professional world is moving, AI is, there's just so many moving factors. One can get overwhelmed very, very easily. And I think that's where it's really important to pause, to make a very conscious effort to pause and reflect and kind of step back. And that step back could be just like 5 minutes in a day, or it could be a time you take out for yourself and say, I'm going to just spend this 1 hour to do just this and not anything else. I'm not thinking about XYZ. I will get down to it when I'm ready to get down to it. I think is really, really important. It's something that I try and do. And it just so happens that and that's where my workout time in the morning is important, because that's the time when more than anything else I just zone out, and I zone out in the sense I don't think about anything except my workout, because that reboot time is so important, because it's human nature to just kind of get sucked into things and not and forget the macro level picture and just kind of get into the nuances. But only when you zoom out, or let's say you take a break, you realize that, okay, now this is the direction I need to move to, and maybe this is not the right direction, right? And I think that has really helped me. For a lot of people, it's meditation. For a lot of people, it's, taking vacations. I think for somebody like me, it's more on a day-to-day basis where I try to take out a few minutes or some time to just kind of zone out and reflect. And the other thing would be from there, see what you want to do, right? I feel upskilling is really important now because it's a constant. You gone are the days when you kind of went to university or school and graduated and took a degree and you were in a very stable job and you were
Yeah.
getting a good increment year
Well
on.
said.
Life change. Like it's just that formula is not relevant anymore. So upskilling is really important, and I think we all are very lucky. I mean, there's so much information now accessible. There's so many courses now accessible online, and that's a lesson I think even for me, I have been trying to consciously, try and say, okay, can I spend an hour in a week to just do a course, or can I spend an hour in a week to do something else which kind of adds to me, rather than just kind of going to the pages of the book or going through the day
Yeah.
in one. So I think these are two things that are really, really, really important. Otherwise life just goes by and you kind of look back and say, I could have done this differently, but I just didn't realize it. That I think that pause helps you step back and see that. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, I think it's a long shower. Like, just take a hot, long shower if you
Yeah.
have. It's hard though, but because when you get in the operation mode and execution mode, to just kind of go into change the mode to a thinking mode, it's challenging. But yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I've tried multiple things. I've tried long showers. I've tried meditation. I've tried like sitting in or cooking, but I think at the
Mhm.
end of the day, I think everybody has their own, but it is so important. And I also realized this when I took a so I took a sabbatical and I did a shift from in 2010 or so, when I paused my entrepreneurial journey and I went in the corporate space. I took a 7-8 month sabbatical. That sabbatical was a blessing in disguise, because it made me realize that, okay, now I've finished one chapter and I'm ready for the next chapter of my life. This is where I went wrong and this is what I'm going to do next. Or this is learning, so to say. I wouldn't even say wrong because that's a negative word. These are my learnings. This is how I'm going to implement it now in the future. So it really helps. And most of us don't realize it, but it really helps.
Yeah. What is your definition of a life well lived?
What's my definition of a life well lived? Well, I think for me, it's always been a key thing for me, and I think again it goes back to my own journey in life and the depression, and then getting out of that depression. It was a lot of being in touch with myself, right? And for me, that's a very integral part of who I am. about being in touch with myself and being honest with myself, right? So every 5 years you change, you evolve as a person. And if you're not, then something is wrong. But I think every 5 years you're changing as a human being and your priorities change and what you want out of your life change. I mean, I was at a point about 8 years ago when I wanted to be like this top notch, CEO and, be extremely successful and XYZ. And but things change. And then now I'm in a space where I feel that, I want to spend, good 30-40% of my time actually on personal growth and my personal life,
Yeah.
which could obviously mean a lot more other things. And the professional life, only becomes this much, right? So or let's say 40-50% of my time goes to professional life. So I feel to be able to recognize those things and those changes, one needs to have those conversations with themselves, and I try to do that very, very often. And then whatever I plan after that is, what I'm feeling at that very, moments. I don't think till date I've done anything, or I try not to do something which is I'm not feeling,
Yeah. No, totally get it. I think again, but I feel to really reflect on what you want is always challenging because I think a lot of us have a certain expectation, expectations from parents or your teachers, etc. And so you have a certain voice in your head, and I think to be able to adapt that as you become an adult, and to be able to adapt that into beyond career to personal growth, life, health, etc. is challenging. But I hear you. It's an
yeah,
ongoing endeavor. So that brings us to the end of a very interesting conversation. But I do have some fun rapid fire questions for you.
yeah. Let's go for it.
Okay. First one is, what is your dream marathon location to run?
Cape Town. Hands. I love that place. I've been there twice, and there's this one marathon there that I have always been wanting to do. And that's the aim for me to do that at least over the next 2-3 years. That I guess still race at least and do a decent enough run. So that one for sure.
If you had to pick one thing about fashion industry in the global south that you wish everybody understood, what would that be?
Fashion in the global south.
Yeah.
I would say when I think of global south, and maybe because I sit in a country that comes in from with so much depth in terms of history and culture, I think that's the first thing that kind of comes to me, right? Is the intricacies and the stories that actually that have gone into building fashion brands or textile and apparel from a place like, India.
The next question is a brand you think is innovating supply chains meaningfully today.
I hate to say this. So it's not a brand that, I mean, it is, it's not a direct brand that's kind of, changing supply chain, so to say, but has definitely evolved supply chain in a very big way. I think two of them, right, is I feel Amazon had a very, very big part to kind of change supply chain, or let's say the meaning of supply chain. The moment Amazon came into the country, the entire meaning of supply chain, the entire meaning of delivery and timelines changed, right?
Yeah.
We're working in a space where in 3 weeks we would get something. The moment Amazon came with next day, same day, that changed the entire ecosystem, right? Which had its impact on supply chain, which means that people were making warehouses, a lot many more warehouses within the city. Consumer wanted a product in 24 hours, right? So that changed for brands as well. So if Amazon was delivering in 24 hours, consumers expected brands or it to deliver in 24 hours as well. So I think that was one. So not directly supply chain, the business model prompted that change in supply chain. And I think the next evolution was with the likes of Zepto, which again is a quick commerce platform in India, and the likes of Zepto. I mean, Zepto kind of again, was pivotal in changing and doing deliveries in 15 minutes. And then a lot of other people have followed, and you have like 3, 4 very, very interesting quick commerce now. And again, it's become a business model and it's become 10, 15 minutes. Now everybody is listing on it, and it's becoming a very, very significant part of people's, or let's say a brand's revenue is coming from that. So I think these two models have been indirectly very, very pivotal to kind of change supply chain, at least in this part of the world.
Yeah. Favorite word in Hindi or English that defines your work ethic today?
Two of them, authentic. I think whatever said and done, being authentic never goes out of fashion. And that's always been my strength, right? The authenticity, be it relationships or be it conversation. be it like deliverable, right? And second is persistence. I think that's something that I again comes very, very naturally to me. Just persist till the time you get what you need to. So I think these two definitely.
What are you listening to or reading during your training runs?
Sometimes it's nothing because sometimes we actually use those runs to just think or reboot or not think at all. Just go with a clear head and clear mind. Actually, even kind of flush, so to say. I actually call it my flush time when I'm just like getting all
I like
the
the word.
negativity out, right? And just kind of rebooting and restarting the day. And then sometimes if I'm in a very high energy mode, then I would listen to some really crazy electronic music. And then if I'm in a very easy weight training day, then it would be a lot of well, I love some of these self help kind of podcasts that give you some direction on certain things. It could be stuff on or it could be stuff on history. So I'm a huge fan of William Dalrymple. So it's a lot of stuff on from Empire.
Yeah, same.
Like story, pretty much storytelling. So it just depends on the mood, and the phase that I'm in, pretty much. But I would say 50% of the time, 50% of the times, it's nothing because I just need that time to myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Empire, and so many people who have been on this podcast before love Empire. So I think I have a huge overlap in the audience between Empires. I think this is a time to get some endorsement from them.
I managed to beat William in Jaipur this year when I went for the Jaipur Fest, and I got a picture clicked with him, and I was so proud of that, and I was so happy and elated because I'm like one of your biggest fans.
Yeah,
Completely changed the way we looked at history, and for
and the
me,
way stories told.
and the way stories are told. Like, for me, the journey started when I read his book, City of Jinns, and I was just like, this
Mm,
guy reading his stuff or listening to him was like poetry. It just makes it so much easier as opposed to like very hardcore books or so literature for somebody like me who's not an avid reader. It just is very easy to absorb that information. So
yeah, agreed. And City of Jinn is so beautifully written. Both like William Dalrymple and Anita Anand love the podcast. Okay, so last, what is the vision for fashion logistics in the future, as per you, in 3 words?
but top of my mind would be speed. I think speed is going to be very important. And speed I mean, I don't mean speed in terms of like getting to things, but I think which also somewhere indirectly means nearshoring, or let's say re-strategizing your sourcing and your manufacturing to be closer to the consumer. So that's what when I say speed, it's more of that. I think definitely in today's day and age is going to be data and visibility and trackability, possibility. All of that is going to play an extremely pivotal role. It's already started. A lot of brands are using QR codes and RFIDs, even in India, to get traceability in. So I think and get data, right? So I think that in itself is going to be right for any and every brand to be able to trace, to be able to track, and to be able to keep an inventory check and hold. And I think I mean these two things in my mind would be super important. And third, of course, would be accountability, right? Accountability from both ends. Accountability as a consumer, accountability. I mean, as consumers, we also have to be aware and let's say, more conscious of how often we shop and how do we reduce what we are shopping. And then, accountability from a brand's point of view and accountability from the enablers, right? Like us, like the supply chain people, etc. So I think that's accountability on, all these fronts would be very, very important. Yeah. I think these two things, definitely.
So very quickly, Delhi, good, bad, ugly. What is it?
A very, very controversial question. I've grown up in Delhi. A large part of my life has been in Delhi. So I love the place. I love the history. I love the coexistence of the history and the modern aspects, or let's say the development, all of that, right? I love being able to coexist in that kind of a space or environment. I love the winters, minus the pollution, of course, which can be a menace. But I love the winters. I love the tikkas that come along with it. I love the history walks that come along with it. I love the fog. I love the whiskey that you can actually finally enjoy drinking along with your, I mean, during the winters. I love the warmth of Delhi, and of course, I'm not a foodie per se, but I love everything that Delhi has to offer in terms of food. Right. I don't know how much I really hate things, but yes, I mean, every city has its, I think its cons, but I've traveled enough. I've kind of lived in other places as well enough to kind of come back here. So I think for me, it's where my heart is pretty much, in spite of a lot of other challenges, but it is where my heart is.
Yeah, I concur. Favorite craft from India that you cannot get enough of? This is a challenging one.
Like, it could be the kanthas, it could be like the zardozis, the work of, like, the zardozi work from the Mughal area, or let's say when you go down to like the streets of Lucknow, the actual, original zardozi work is beautiful. The kantha work from Bengal in Orissa is stunning, right? And then you have the ikkats, and then you have the silks from Banaras.
Mm.
So there's
So the,
there's just so much. It's so delicious, and it's just like, this is so much to absorb and see. And like I said, there's so many brands now doing such interesting stuff, and to see it in a very different light kind of makes you fall back in love again with those things, right? But I think, if one had to, I can't zero down on a craft per se, but I would love to, spend a lot of my personal time, and that's something I've been thinking about, a lot of my personal time to actually travel into the, different parts of the country again, to kind of revisit some of these crafts and see them again, right? And go back to the regions.
yeah,
Because
super.
one misses doing that, right? When you're living in a city, when you're just like shopping all from the Western or whatever fast fashion brands, which also I kind of have reduced, but you kind of missing the real stuff. So I think, yeah, that's been on my list for a while, but I can't zero down on one for sure.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you.
Yeah, it's a lot to offer. Yeah.
Thanks, Joy, for first of all that information. I have so many follow-up questions. This can easily become like 4 podcasts, but I want to say that I'm just grateful to have your company, but also your guidance, but also your advice, and happy to make this conversation off of WhatsApps and into the podcast.
Thank you so much, and pleasure, and look forward to chatting soon.